Thank you. This is a meeting of the Milton Zoning Board of Appeals in connection with the 40B application of 648, 652 Canton Avenue in Milton. My name is Brian Hurley. I'm acting as the chairman of this board. With me are Ted Daver and Mike Brown. Before we get started with testimony, I just wanted to sort of bring some things up to date here. I was looking over the materials that I've received over the last week or so, and I thought I'd just list them so that people would know the kinds of things that have been submitted to the town and are available for public review and scrutiny. The first is a letter from Davis Square Architects, Cliff Bomer, who is acting as a peer review person for the town of Milton. Mr. Bomer is present with us tonight, and we'll have the benefit of his testimony. We had a letter dated September 16th, 2021 from Vanass, Jeffrey Dirks. That's a supplemental report relating to traffic, also a peer review report. We had a letter from Scott Horsley dated September 17th, 2021. I believe he represents or was engaged by Mr. Corcoran and Mr. Corcoran's clients, and will provide his review at some point along the way. We had an engineering report from Chesia Consulting with John Chesia that was dated September 10th, 2021. And I understand that Mr. Chesia will be available tonight if we have time. I have a memo from Ned Corcoran dated September 17th, 2021, what I've styled as an access memo. And it's sort of a statement of position with respect to the secondary access that has been proposed for this development. Mr. Corcoran raises some issues about the availability of that access in the memo. I had requested that the fire chief comment give us his views and give us a memo addressing fire safety under two scenarios, that is with the emergency access and without the secondary emergency access. And I'm expecting at some point we'll get that memo and hopefully even have the fire chief come in and speak a bit about the fire safety issues. We've received a peer review piece from Tetra Tech dated September 14, 2021. And then finally, we received a letter some time ago, I just hadn't mentioned it before, from the Milton town engineer dated August 10th, 2021. So those are the materials that, in addition to what we've already received from the applicant, but those are some materials that we've received over the last week or two in connection with this application. Some peer review, some for opponents to the plan, and hopefully some input from town officials as well. So with that backdrop, I guess I would I'll look to Mr. Bomer perhaps to be the first to speak this evening, unless somebody has a different order that they would propose. No? Okay. Well, the floor is yours, Cliff.
Okay. I think I want to start in a really general way, and I do want to point out that I learned an awful lot from Sean Reardon's report that informed a good bit of what I wrote as well. But I want to back up further for the benefit of the board for whom I work and anybody else who may be looking for a way to put these comments in context. And just very generally speaking, design is an iterative process. It's really rare for somebody to hit a home run first time and be able to check all the boxes, that everything has been figured out. And I think the first proposal we saw, am I still on? Oh, good, okay, I'm sorry, because I've been having internet problems today. And I think the first proposal we saw was something that the developer had a comfort level with, and they were trying to see if it would fit on that reduced size site. They received a lot of negative reaction to that. It certainly was not, didn't pass through the sieve of my sieve of looking at traditional 40B design criteria that are laid out in the statute itself, as well as other guidelines that have been written, but also was having a lot of issues from an engineering perspective. And I think the current approach was really a correct response to that. It turned what was a very large structure, very large, essentially parking garage with a building on top, really took a radical turn in their approach, which may not be the way they wanted to do it, but I credit them with engaging in a legitimate design process, which is truly iterative. The way to get to the solution is put out a few big steps, and as the design advances, each step gets a little bit smaller as you get closer to something that really works satisfactorily. And I think the kind of biggest picture, the way to look at what happened between the first proposal and this one was certainly making a much larger site available always makes a problem easier to solve, always, especially in a suburban setting. And that was correct, absolutely correct. And taking a very large structure that created any number of architectural and planning, civil engineering issues, breaking that into a lot of small pieces, in this case 13, was also the right approach, the idea of breaking it up into smaller pieces. So I think what I want to say mainly is that they're on the right track. In my mind, there's absolutely no question they're on the right track. And I think that that the idea of making many smaller buildings certainly, without any question, works much better as far as scale of structures and a type of setting, residential setting, that I think will work, not simply because of familiarity, but I think because it simply has many more options for making many things that people expect in that kind of environment work better. And I think what's interesting is that where my report goes, more than anything else, is great. The pieces are there, working with smaller pieces and generally working with outdoor, open air parking is the right approach. And what I'm hoping, and as I noted in my letter, we've worked with this development team before, the town has, and I have, as I haven't ever worked for the developer, but through the town, I've had good experiences with their receptivity to design and the design process in general. And I think they're at a good launching point for saying, okay, we took that big building that people really had a hard time with understanding, and we broke it into a lot of small pieces. And we're looking at one way of doing that, of laying those pieces out in digestible form with the appropriate, probably, I'm not a parking guy, but maybe the appropriate number of parking spaces. And the focus of my report is that's great. That is absolutely the right approach. I can see a way now that this development can really fit in. There's space available now to really do serious, thoughtful mitigation. There's far less to even mitigate given the scale of the buildings. So very much on the right track. But what I hope can happen from this point forward, and I hope the developer has been or will be as receptive in this case as they have been in other cases, that they will keep pushing it. And ironically, I think what I've learned from observing this iteration of the design is that we need more open space to work with. So interestingly, they did increase the number of buildings. They pushed it out onto a much larger site. But the plan, in my opinion, is too squeezed. And I think I outlined it pretty carefully in my letter, which is that there's a a thoughtful pedestrian circulation path. There's a nice connectivity across the site, but the buildings are very close to the pedestrian walkways. Many parking spaces are aimed directly at the unit windows that are very close by. So I think what they've shown us through this study is, okay, we can break it up into smaller scale pieces, and at our first pass, or maybe it's your third or fourth pass, so I don't want to pretend I know, but at this point, this is what we've come up with. And the kind of irony is, I think that it's moved to a new level where, in order to get more open space to solve a number of the issues that I identified, and I think Sean Reardon maybe touched on as well, they're at a point where, to get back some of that open space so they can start to make the organization of the site work better and some of the detail level work better, is I think they need to look at a consolidation effort. And by that, I mean, what they've done is they've organized the site around a spine, a kind of parking spine. And that they demonstrated, I think, perfectly that if you want to have the kind of parking ratio that seems palatable, this is how much space it takes up. And so once you do that, if you satisfy that, what you end up with is buildings that are separated essentially by the width of parking lots. The width of parking lots plus a walkway, plus any setback to the building. And that's very readable in this plan. The buildings are relatively uniformly dispersed across the site, separated by that kind of module of the 60-foot parking plus 5-foot sidewalks plus what looked to be about a 4-foot setback to the buildings. And on top of that, and I think in the right spirit of separating it into smaller buildings, they create side setbacks between the buildings that range in, I don't remember the exact dimensions, I have the plan in front of me, but there are various dimensions between the buildings, but those spaces turn into kind of really not very usable spaces. They create more opportunity for building envelope for the units that might be within those buildings, but they don't really turn into any programmable spaces. So on I'm thinking of consolidation in two ways. One way is to look at this as a real learning experience of how much space it takes up for this kind of idea, but look to a plan that can gather up these smaller green spaces that are most of them are actually in kind of residual spaces. I think they're connected in the sense that you can get to the green spaces by walking on the sidewalks. But as I've already said, I think the sidewalks are too close to the buildings. And once you get to the green spaces, not all of them are really, I think, put in a way that they really read and would ultimately function as public green spaces. And the examples are the two buildings at the very top of the site. I think it's buildings 9 and 10. There's a lawn between those, fronted by a pavilion of some sort. And to me, that looks like a semi-private space. That doesn't really look like a public space. Similarly, the community garden on the side of sorry, I should look at my plan, of the southwesternmost building is in a kind of private area that dominates the front entries of those units over there. And I kind of question whether that's the right place to put it. So essentially what I hope this developer is willing to look at is trying to gather up those green spaces and consolidate them in a way that you'll have more meaningful spaces that really read as public spaces. And I have some kind of detailed suggestions suggestions that I would hope would stimulate a process to look at this issue of making green spaces that are properly scaled and in the right location on the site, and be sure that they maintain traditional hierarchy of fully public spaces, which is different from semi-public to private spaces. The other form of consolidation that I'm hoping is achievable is some of the building footprints. So it is the case that it's much better working with smaller scale buildings, but I do think there's an opportunity to gain open space in the development through making at least one larger building, and which could serve multiple functions. It could open up ground plane to help create this integrated, more readable or public spaces that help in organizing the site, but it could also create more accessible units. So the way that it is now, there are no elevators on the entire site, which from an accessibility perspective is certainly not forward thinking, I guess I would say. And I think this site, because of the way they've reorganized it, has a real opportunity of creating at least one larger building that could result in the elimination of one or two of the other smaller buildings and concentrate a larger number of buildings in one building. That I think there's at least one location on this site that could support a 4-story building, elevator fed, that could really serve the needs both of attracting people who really aren't capable of walking upstairs or don't want to make a habit of walking upstairs, but as importantly, provide an environment where people can age in place on the site. There are also day-to-day issues of people with baby carriages and just accommodating people who really don't find it all that attractive to have to walk upstairs to the units. The other advantage of that consolidation of creating at least one larger scale elevator fed building is that it would be possible, I do think it's possible at that end of the site, the far end of the site, to create parking underneath the building. And by creating parking underneath the building, we open up even more space on the site that can be used for natural infiltration of stormwater, but it can also be used to create a better buffer between the residential buildings. And as I pointed out, I think finding a way to have an organizing element that isn't about parking lots. And there are a number of other small details in my report that are pretty traditional things that I write about, building code related. There is an important issue about, you have a very good architect on board, but I certainly would want to make sure that they're comfortable with all of the units that have only a single means of egress. Those are all issues that are completely solvable on the architectural side. But for now, with the hope that we can continue this into exploring some site plan alternatives, I would urge the board to encourage the developer to continue this idea of how to deploy smaller buildings, primarily surface parking, but solve some of these limitations that I think they've shown us that result from creating properly scaled buildings, but perhaps too many of them, and perhaps cited too much based on the kind of parking that's needed to support them. One last point is that one of Sean's comments that he made that really resonated with me, I think through some manipulation of the orientation of buildings, I think you could easily get rid of at least one of the dead ends in the property that I think would just help overall with functionality of the site, emergency access, et cetera. And one last comment, I think I did point out, I think, an opportunity, a viable opportunity for relocating the clubhouse into a location that is more centrally located, would have dedicated parking, and would open up onto usable outdoor space that I think creates more opportunities for recreation and enjoyment of the residents. So I applaud the developer for taking such a bold leap in a very, very different direction. And I hope that they're open to continue this process. I feel like it's starting over, and I'm sure it feels that way to them. But I think they are within shooting range of coming up with a site plan that could solve a lot of the issues that I've identified, and perhaps that Sean has as well. So with that, again, I apologize for a very detailed letter and for arriving so late. That's completely on me. I'm sorry about that. I'm certainly open for any questions if you want to hear more about any of my thoughts.
Do we have any questions?
There's
Jesse,
no
let me.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. No?
Yeah, I was just going to say no one has their hands up.
I wanted to ask Jesse a question. Jesse, I assume that, I mean, I found close comments to be very helpful and enlightening. He looks at things in a way that I just don't see it when I look at plans in the same way. And I wonder if there's a way that we could sort of put Cliff up with your people, if there was an interest in doing that for some kind of a working session where they, talk outside the context of a public hearing and see what can be done and not done. And I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I would say we've certainly done that in the past with Mr. Bomer, and I echo your sentiment, Mr. Chair. His comments are always very helpful for us, and he certainly sees things from a way that I don't see things myself. I take that as us fellow dirt lawyers, we just see things a little bit differently. But that having been said, we did just get a chance to look at Mr. Bomer's comments just yesterday when they came in, so we're still reviewing them. I do see that Mr. Loringer from Embark is on the line. I don't know if he has any initial reaction, but in terms of the suggestion, Mr. Chair, for a working group or something like that offline, those are definitely helpful. And what I would suggest on that is what we did to great success, I thought, on the project at Blue Hill Avenue was to organize a working session with Mr. Reardon and Mr. Bomer, as well as our consultants in engineering, architecture, and landscape architecture, to really put everybody in the same room, because a lot of the times the comments that Mr. Bomer or Mr. Reardon would have implicate the other disciplines. So we found it to be helpful to have everyone in the same room at the same time.
How would we go about bringing that about?
Well, what we did in that case, Mr. Hurley, was we put all the onus of that on the thankless Judy Barrett to make the arrangements to organize that. Okay. I'm happy to play a role in that, but she was very helpful to help set that up.
Well, I'm gonna make that a charge to her to try and arrange that kind of a meeting between, and I think Cliff and Sean and their counterparts on your team should have a Saturday morning or whatever the timing would be of a session, and see what common ground there is and what changes can be made that will just make the project better from everyone's perspective. So I will take on the role of hooking up with Judy and suggesting that she be the point person on arranging such a meeting, because it does seem like there's been progress, and I think more progress could be made if these sort of four talents and minds get together to do so. So I will follow up on that shortly. I think perhaps it's a good idea to have Sean speak next, because I think he's sort of in the same world that Cliff is in. And
Mr. Chair, may I? I'm sorry, Ned Corcoran.
Go ahead, Ned.
I've just gotten home from the hospital, and
oh, great.
I've been
glad to hear
listening, and
that.
thank you. My wife unfortunately does have a fractured elbow, but we'll work on it. I've been listening, so I've listened to Mr. Bomer. I've not seen his report, so don't know. But I of two minds. One is there is a significant volume of buildings that are set against property lines, particularly on the Mergewood side, that would tend to overwhelm potentially the abutters. And I'm wondering whether abutters could have the right to have their folks participate in any of these meetings, because at the end of the day, the abutters are the ones that have to live with the outcome. And I think they ought to have some input into that process.
Absolutely. I see no reason not to have that. Who would that be, Ned? Who would?
I don't know
be?
at this off the top of my head. I don't know. I would have to let Judy know. If she's the one who would be arranging that, I would certainly arrange it.
Okay, because I mean, in the list of people that I've seen that have submitted materials on behalf of neighbors, I don't see anybody that falls into that sort of category. I don't think Scott Horsley is in that world, but maybe he is. I don't know. But you don't know anyone else presently that would be a participant in such a meeting.
There will be at least someone from the neighborhood who
Okay.
is in that realm, and so I can't give you a name tonight. I'm sorry, I don't have the information.
Okay,
And
well,
this
maybe
is-
you could give that name then to Judy Barrett.
I
if you
I
would.
will. This is I was anticipating after last week's meeting with Sean, when Sean Reardon was present at last week's meeting, that he would be leading off tonight, and that the leadoff discussion would be more about site, civil, stormwater, etc. I had not seen Mr. Bomer's report, was not aware that he would be speaking tonight based on what I understood from last week. So I'm not prepared tonight to tell you who might be ready
Okay.
and available to.
Fair
respond.
enough, but if you could just hook up with Judy.
I will be
and,
happy to.
And I'm going to ask Judy to try and coordinate all that and have everyone represented with the common goal of, improvements to this plan. I think that's a good way to go here. And so with that segue, I'd like to maybe hear from Sean.
May I
Fine.
interrupt just for 1 second? Tim Sawinski, it may be with what just transpired, so his hand is up, and I'm not
Okay.
sure. Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I can't speak for Judy, but I suspect that she would pipe up at this point. Obviously, it's the board's prerogative to organize whatever style of working session it chooses. What we have been finding and the practice in the other hearings where these types of sessions have taken place is it really has just been the board's peer reviewers and the applicants, subject matter experts. The thinking being, the more people that are involved, the fuzzier the line gets between the public hearing that happens in a public setting and, folks involved in not quite as public deliberations and discussions. The thinking being that, this is an application that's before the board. There's an applicant, there are professionals that work on behalf of the board, and, all of this stuff gets presented in the public hearing for consumption and comment and testimony from whoever cares to testify. Again, if Judy's going to be here a little bit later, she may be able to articulate this a little bit better. But she's been, advising the board to really keep these sessions to a limited amount of participation. And again, also for the sake of consistency between these hearings. So I just wanted to chime in with that. Judy may offer some more commentary later, so maybe this is something that maybe we can revisit later on.
Yeah, I certainly would anticipate that it would be limited to professionals. And I have in mind that there's going to be neighborhood participation. But if the group has their own professionals, I'm not sure why they wouldn't be able to participate. I think all the professional wisdom that can be brought to bear is a good thing. But I will leave that to Judy to sort of work that out, and to Ned to advise us as to who the group has engaged that might participate in such a meeting. And if there isn't anyone, then so be it. But I will communicate with Judy on that point. But I think that having professional people talk about the issues that have been raised by Cliff and others, I think is a good thing. What we're looking for at the end of the day is the best project, I guess, that can be devised here. So, enough said. Why don't we hear from Sean?
May I just make one very brief comment on that point? Sure. Thank you. Just sort of echoing what Mr. Zawinski said, and the past practice of the board, at least on the Blue Hill Avenue case, has been to limit participation just to our consultants in the towns. And I do tend to think that that's the right approach, but will of course abide by the board's prerogative in terms of inviting other consultants such as Mr. Chesia or Mr. Horsley if their presence is appropriate. What I would just say on that is a word to them that I think it needs to be understood that the purpose of this kind of a session is not to advocate, and it's not to try to lobby one side or the other to take a point of view, but rather to take an objective look at what we've presented and try to find solutions, engineering solutions, design solutions to make this the best project. So if that's the spirit from which these other attendees would approach such a meeting, then perhaps their attendance would be warranted. But if it's more to advocate for a denial of the project or for conditions of the project that we would deem inappropriate in this case, I don't think that would be a productive approach to this kind of meeting.
I agree with you 100%. If the only purpose to have these folks attend would be to offer constructive suggestions, not to advocate in favor of a denial among experts. So I agree. Now, if that's the purpose, then I don't think their presence would be welcomed or appropriate. But if there's others who have wisdom to share in a positive way about improvements, then I think they should be welcome to join. So that's sort of the way I see that. But I take your point.
Mr. Chair, I'll certainly make sure that anyone who's representing the neighborhood will be participating in that proper spirit.
Okay, why don't we hear from Mr. Reardon?
Great, all set? Yep, again, my name is Sean Reardon, from Tech, serving as the board's peer review consultant, principally for civil engineering matters. Yeah, I'll echo Cliff's sentiments. My immediate takeaway from the revised submittal was, yeah, certainly a great change, very positive, substantial improvement over what we saw last time. But most importantly, because it created some space in which to work. Even though the space has a lot of parking and a lot of buildings, having a landscape that's not dominated by a structure and not dominated by a big structure, allows more space in which to work. So it went a long way in addressing some of our concerns from the last time. Our other takeaway was the quality of the submission. The work was really well done, particularly the civil engineering work. So coming at this from a point of very good documentation, very well done, properly done, thoughtful, aggressive, yes, but thoughtful. So really, a positive takeaway with that regard. That being said, obviously still a dense project. I think Cliff put it, really perfectly, too squeezed. I think that's kind of the takeaway I had. Footprint is all over the site, a lot of parking, not a lot of usable space left over. It seems like kind of what was available was programmed, but not really sort of created for any particular intent. So I guess our key takeaway is there a way we can work with Cliff and the design team to maybe consolidate buildings, maybe do some larger structure in some area so that we can free up some footprint on the site to make more usable space. We had, as we usually do, a lot of comments. We organized those all in the letter, but our key takeaways are fire access is our number one concern. If you look at the plan, there's no way for a fire truck to pull into the site and then leave the site without having to back up. And as I'm sure you can imagine, it's not that easy a maneuver to back up a fire truck and make a a 3-point turn to get in and out of an area, let alone an area that's got parking on both sides. So what we challenge the applicant to do is to come up with some way to make it easier for an emergency vehicle to circulate through the site. And by extension, that also means, delivery vehicles. That means, if you have a large tractor trailer that needs to come into the site to deliver furniture or something, that's not necessarily just something that helps fire access. It helps all sorts of access. Then the next thing, as you can imagine, because there's so much more impervious area being added to the site, their stormwater system is really big. Not saying that it's wrong. It's just, it's really, really, really big, and it encumbers a lot of the site. So we want to take a look at that to see if there are other ways to consolidate some of those components, or maybe put them in different spaces so that we cannot have it dominate the site so much. It also includes what I would consider a relatively new technology for storage. It's these plastic cells, like milk crate things, like Phil was describing. Not a whole lot of history. Civil engineering is based in things that are kind of proven 1,000 years ago. So when we have something that's only 10 years old or something like that, us civil engineers tend to sort of get a little bit anxious about using them. My experience with similar situations is not so great. So we're going to see if we can look at other solutions for that. The other thing is, and I think Ned mentioned this, Mr. Corcoran mentioned this, is really the development is really tight to 656 Canton Ave. That's the home on Merwood that the stream runs under. So what we're hoping to do is to see if there was ways that we could maybe share some of the buffer zone from side to side, so that get a little relief on that project side. All of the comments that Cliff talked about, consolidation of buildings, those are all things that we would support, because basically it just frees up footprint on the site for other uses. And we think that is a really a good way to sort of create some of the flexibility that we look for. Next steps, I think the best thing to do would be to meet with the fire chief. Either I could do that myself, or we could do it with the applicant, because some of those things need it's like kind of a cooperative discussion about kind of what the chief wants and what we would prefer among several options. So really good to have a dialogue directly with him. And then we'd obviously love to be part of a team effort between Cliff, the architects, and there's the applicant civil engineers to sort of come at this from all sides and see what kind of solutions that we can come up with. I think it's key that we do it together, because obviously anytime a building moves, anytime a parking lot changes, that changes the civil engineering design as well. So I think those two things go hand in hand. That being said, I think really the direction they've taken makes everything that we've looked at manageable. So I think there are solutions to all of these things. And the question is how do we get to the right solutions?
Thank you, Sean. Yeah, I think the fire element of it is very important to me. So what's the best way to get the chief's thoughts on this, Sean? Do you think? Is it for you to meet with him, or I had reached out and hoped that he might be able to come to one of these meetings, and I think he's tied up for a few weeks, but hopefully he may come toward the end. But I mean, I think his take on fire is very important to me from a public safety standpoint. So what's the best way to go at that?
Yeah, this worked. We did this similarly for East Milton, and I thought it worked really well. As we just had representatives from the applicant and us met with chief in a Zoom call, and I put together a list of sort of thoughts that I had ahead of time for the chief, because frankly, it's my job to look at all these things. The chief has other things that he needs to be focusing on. So, what helped out quite a bit is we just had a list of things that I had thought that sort of got the chief thinking about, some of those issues. And then we worked through what the chief would expect to see and what appropriate solutions were. And we sort of came to a really quick game plan on how we meet what his needs are.
I mean, can you coordinate that here?
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's very important.
Yeah, and Tim was instrumental in coordinating that last time with the chief.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I can get that together if that's what you're interested in.
Yeah, well, I mean, of all the issues, it seems to me fire safety is probably one of my biggest issues. As I think it should be. So I think if we put together everyone from all groups to talk about fire safety issues, I think I think that's critical and will be very helpful to the board. I mean, if people can report back and say, we've done this, that, or the other, and this is going to improve the situation, then that's very helpful to the board as we deliberate and make determinations. So that would be great.
Just to note, Mr. Chair, sorry to interrupt. The applicant did have a meeting with Fire Chief Madden, I believe the last week of August. Mr. Reardon was not present for that meeting, but our engineers and our traffic engineers were present. At the time, Chief Madden was looking at the plans from, I guess, a high level. And so if you think it would be helpful to have a follow-up with Mr. Reardon present, we're certainly willing to do that.
I think that would, Mr. Schumer. If you can participate in arranging that, I think it'll be great. And someone can report back to me and say, or to us and say, the chief's looked at this, he has X, Y, and Z recommendations, and those will be implemented, or, whatever, however that dialogue goes. I think it'll be helpful to the board. Okay, Sean, thank you for that presentation. I'm not sure there's any other people for the town here right now tonight. Unless I'm wrong, I don't think there's any other of the consultants that are on board. So I guess I would turn to Ned. Ned, do you want to put some people on and present some information to us?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. You can start with John Chesia.
Wonderful.
I know that he submitted a letter, and he's got some comments, and then I would follow with Scott Horsley, and then I would speak to a couple of issues.
Okay, sounds great. Mr. Chesia, you're on.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your time. So I think one thing, and Sean did a great job. He picked up on pretty much everything I had. There's a couple of things, though, I think that the board should also be aware of. And Sean did mention this, but there's a lot of fill being brought into the site. I mean, it looks like pretty much the west side, the added parcel plus maybe the westerly part of the original parcel, it's almost 7 feet of fill to get the drainage to work, which I'm not convinced that it will work anyway, but that's going to be a lot of work to bring that much fill in. There's a massive disruption. And John didn't talk about the construction plan, but I know it's in his letter, but I still think that's a pretty important aspect of something like this, especially for the people that live around the site. One thing that was done in this project, if you recall, the prior project, there was no infiltration because the soils were not suitable for infiltration. Then the new project comes in and now it's all infiltration, but the soils haven't changed. There's maybe a couple more tests were done. There's a high water table, there's dense glacial till. If you look at soils mapping that's been done by the Natural Resource Conservation Service, it's dense glacial till. It has very low permeability, considerably lower than what the applicant is using for a rate for recharge. And we would request the board require permeability tests to actually prove out that their assumptions are correct. Their assumptions are based on a soil texture and not on anything actually performed in the field to determine how fast the water will drain out. And they look at the plan, essentially the whole westerly side of the site has porous pavement with massive underground storage underneath it. And then there's multiple smaller systems towards the front of the site. If the stuff doesn't drain into the ground, basically it goes either into the stream or into the town roadway. There is an outlet. Nobody's looking at anything underground. You won't even really know. I think that needs to be really shaken out and proven out to prove what you really have out there. Make sure it works. In the westerly side, it's proposed to have porous pavement. The porous pavement design, location, and how it works is not consistent with the DEP requirements for that, but they're for many reasons. But one of the things the board needs to understand is their assumption is 100-year rainfall goes straight down through the pavement into the stuff below. Not realistic. Porous pavement is for small storms. You get, ½ inch, ½ inch, that'll go through it. As Sean noted in his letter, it's subject to clogging. There's a lot of problems with that, but it's not ever been assumed that a 100-year storm would go right through it, which is what their design assumes, and that's not correct. there's inadequate groundwater separation for a porous pavement system. For a regular system, you can have as little as 2 feet. They have not enough tests under the systems to prove what they really have, but they're using the infiltration as part of their overall runoff rate control. There's no mounding analysis. They need to do a mounding analysis. This is going to be an extremely complicated mounding analysis. This thing is shaped like a T and L. It's all over the place. It's not like you can use the simple programs. This would be very, very complicated. If you don't want to do a mounding analysis, you got to have 4 feet of groundwater separation. That raises the whole site 2 feet. So
in layman's terms, can you explain to me what the mounding analysis is?
So when you infiltrate a massive volume of water like they're proposing to do, it raises the water table over what it is normally. As it raises up, it'll impact the capacity of the system to drain out and the time it takes to drain out. And where these systems all have a pipe that outlets back into the main, system, either to Canton Ave or to the stream, one of them goes both ways. All of their assumptions may not be accurate. If you have a slower infiltration rate and you have a high mound, and we know the soils are tight, so that means it's going to go through very, very slowly. You're going to end up with mounds. It's a part of the requirements for DEP. And water table coming up in a case like this, and I think Scott might talk on this some more, it's probably going to be a permanent feature because the way it's designed, all the little storms would all be recharged, but all the big storms, a good percentage of would as well. Currently, with poor soils, you get some recharge and some runoff. They're going to put a lot more into the ground, which would tend to make the water table right under that spot come up. And that's what the mounding analysis would determine is how high it comes up, how long it stays up, how far it spreads, does it impact the wetland, does it impact abutters and things like that. And it would be a complicated one in this case. It's not a simple analysis. Does that help?
It does. Thank you.
Okay. The other thing is the model period of the model is too short. So you don't even know how much water they're proposing to infiltrate overall, which is kind of a critical component. I think they stopped after 24 hours, which catches the runoff from the pavement, but it doesn't catch the discharge of that runoff. So, I mean, those are my main points. Like I said, it's definitely better than the previous plan, I think, which I think was not even a practical thing from the very start. I think everybody kind of recognizes that. And, starting from nothing or something not workable, they come to this, which still needs, I think, a fair bit of work. Thank you.
Thank you. Jesse, if I could just turn to you for a second. What's your take on this, though? This suggestion that a mounding analysis be done. Is that something that your clients would be willing to consider?
Mr. Chair, our civil engineer, I believe, is in the audience.
Okay.
His name is Phil Cordero from Allen and Major. I think he would be able to comment more intelligently on that than I could.
Okay. Because that is a concern, and I think a legitimate concern of the neighborhood is the impact of surface water and groundwater. And any of us who live in Milton, including myself, knows the problems of water in the town. And so I think it's a real concern, and I would want to be sure that we did everything to completely understand what impacts there were going to be, both the surface water and groundwater. And so if Mr. Cordero wants to jump in and talk about this, that would be great.
Yeah, good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Thanks for having me, Phil Cordero from Allen and Major Associates. Just to answer your question quite specifically, Mr. Hurley, we are looking into the groundwater mounding analyses. It was a point raised in the Tetra Tech, it was a point raised through Mr. Cheshire's memo We're looking into providing that analysis. As he astutely pointed out, it is a complicated site. It's complex analyses, but it's necessary. And I'm coordinating that with the applicant and putting together that material. Because we want you to be aware of what's happening underneath the ground. What people have characterized the site at is accurate. It is very dense till soil with very low permeability rates and infiltration rates. And our design has been predicated on using the slowest rates allowable under the static design method in the Mass DEP handbook based on the soil textural analyses. And as such, because it is so low, that's why you see such voluminous stormwater systems on site. It's to offset that slow infiltration rate. Basically, the drain out of the bathtub is very, very small. Therefore, the bathtub has to be very, very large. And that's what we're doing here. So we're prepared to engage on that comment, provide additional information. So I'm happy to answer further questions, but just focused on that groundwater mounding, we're prepared for that.
Okay, thank you. So that, I mean, it's still a matter under study, and some additional information will be provided to the board to address some of these issues that have been raised.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Excuse me, was Sean Rhiannon? Sean?
I'm sorry?
Sean has his hand up?
Okay.
Okay.
I didn't want to interrupt, but I just wanted to add that, what we're hoping is that there are some changes that result from Cliff's comments, and those are necessarily going to require modifications to the system that Phil's designed. So what we want to do is the system settle down a little bit in its design before we start doing in detailed modeling analysis and hydrological information. So to Phil's point and John's point, it's complicated analysis, and we certainly don't want to do it on a system that might change.
Okay.
Yep.
So we should sort of solve the first set of issues first, and then we'll have a realistic thing for them to assess.
Agreed.
Okay, understood. Thank you. Okay, who's up next?
Mr. Chair, I'm going to have Scott Horsley next, but I just wanted to remind the board of Mr. Bomer's comments in the last portion of the hearing that suggested that you should start with the understanding of the engineering of the ground and design your systems to manage what's in the ground before you hand it to the architect. And it appears that what they've done is taken a set of buildings that they came up with in June and then handed it to an engineer to try and figure out how to solve the stormwater and groundwater. And I think it's backwards.
I can address that if you want.
Sure.
Okay, Ned, I think that I understand that perspective totally, but I think the best projects come out through collaboration through the architect and the civil engineer. I think that the notion of breaking it up into the smaller buildings, and I think Sean spoke to this earlier, gives greater opportunity for solving the problems. So I think in this case, and it isn't always this way, but I think in this case, certainly knowing what, how the soils work, and architects need to know how the soils work from a structural perspective. But I would say it's not uncommon for the architect, and sometimes even the landscape architect, to lead with a site plan that really makes sense to the developer, and they think it fulfills, functional goals and has the right number of units and whatever else it is. And then it goes to the civil engineer to say, okay, well, look, here's the soil. You either can or can't make this thing work. So I think the order of operations is okay. That's my opinion. Sean may want to comment on that, but I think that for looking ahead as the design evolves, certainly having all parties on board is the critical piece, so that there's no point designing an infiltration system if there's going to be a big change in moving the parking around or moving buildings around. That's kind of my perspective. I'm used to the order of operations going as in this direction. Sean, can you comment on that maybe?
Yeah, I think it's important to state that the information that we've seen is a lot closer to the mark than it was before. So we're starting at a fundamentally different point in terms of viability. So I think we're starting a lot closer to what's an appropriate solution than we were before. So I think the level of information that has been provided, level of design that's been done, makes me confident that we're at a point where we can certainly start engaging in the discussion that Cliff described and end up with something even better.
Joe Tambosi has his hand up.
Yes.
Thank you, Bev. Mr. Chair, for the record, Joe Tamposi. I just wanted to echo, Cliff's comments and also Sean's comments there. I think it's probably an incorrect, way of phrasing it to say that we plopped buildings onto a site in order to get to this site design. There was a considerable amount of collaboration, planning, forethought, and team iterations that have gone into this design as is. And those have made sure that the engineering works with the architecture and works with the landscape architecture. So, I think it's important just to note that this is a coordinated among all the disciplines. It's not, one discipline necessarily leading the other.
Okay, thank you for that. Ned, what did you wanted to have Scott Horsley speak?
Yes, I'd like Scott Horsley to speak if you could. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Scott Horsley for the record. I will just briefly summarize my letter I submitted. I do have a couple of figures, one of which would help, I think, a lot clarify this groundwater mounding question that you asked. If you'd be willing to let me share my screen and just show 2 or 3 images from my letter, would that be possible?
If you can do it technically.
Okay, thank you. Well, I will certainly give it a try here and see if I can do it. Can you see that first figure of the map?
I can.
Okay. So I just have, I'll just quickly walk through my letter, and the second image I believe I'm going to show is the groundwater mounding, but I do want to start with my first comment, and that is the setting of the site. And as the applicant just mentioned, they've done a lot of work thinking about this site, and I'm sure they're fully aware that this project is immediately adjacent to a headwater stream. I don't know if they're familiar with headwater streams in terms of a subcategory of streams, but I've tried to provide some references in my letter. Headwater streams are essentially the upper reach of a river system, and they're actually more sensitive than other parts downstream. And I think it makes sort of common sense. There's a lot less flow in these streams, so any hydrologic changes, if you add water or subtract it, it's going to be a bigger percentage impact on that stream. So because it is a headwater stream, and I'm showing the headwater wetlands here, which is on an adjacent lot, and then the stream flowing along the entire boundary, I think the entire western boundary of the project site in very close proximity. So I think my first comment is it's really important, and I believe the applicant probably has considered this, that this is not just a stream, but it is a extra sensitive stream because of its low flow characteristics and the associated ecosystems, which are fully protected in the wetlands protection regulations against alterations to as it says, and I quoted this in my letter, any changes to the flow regime or the drainage patterns, meaning the amount of groundwater getting to the stream, the amount of surface water, or the timing of that. So those are the standards that need to be met, and I'm not sure that we have enough information yet to determine whether or not, in fact, that can be done. But my first comment is relative to the sensitivity of the resource immediately adjacent. And I'll just scroll down through my letter to find, just walk through each comment. And the third one actually is my groundwater mounding picture. So I apologize, I'll get to that in just a moment. But the second comment is, I think we all agree, the prior engineer certainly testified to this, and I think the current engineer and Sean and everybody is in agreement that this is a pretty challenging site. It's dense glacial till, shallow water, Low permeability, I'm not sure we really know the permeability yet. I agree with John Chesia's comment there. Well, the guidance from the DEP Stormwater Handbook, they're required to meet for this exact reason, requires a full analysis of the site. In DEP's words, and I'm quoting here, that means a minimum, maybe more, but at least 2 test pits at each infiltration system. And I've gone through the project site, and there are 15 infiltration systems proposed. As the applicant has indicated, they tried to spread this out to a bunch of small systems. There are 15 systems proposed. None of those systems have the minimum of 2 required test pits. So that's simply an omission procedurally, but more substantively, again, as we've all talked, and I think we all agree, this is a very sensitive site. So I would say maybe more than 2 would be good, but certainly a minimum of 2 at each location would be important. And I do fully agree with Mr. Chesia's comment that permeability values will be really important to running the groundwater mounting analysis that we just discussed a few minutes ago. Comment 3 is in fact the groundwater mounting analysis. I'm very pleased to hear that the applicant is agreeing to do that because I certainly think it's warranted, so that's great. And to your question, Mr. Chairman, one of the reasons I wanted to show this picture is I hope this picture, this diagram, which comes from the U.S. Geological Survey, helps clarify what groundwater mounting is. And I'll just point out a couple of things here in this diagram. So at the top here, we have an infiltration facility where surface stormwater is infiltrated into the subsurface. That water then moves vertically downward and towards the water table, which is indicated by this solid black line here, which is the upper surface of the groundwater system. And what happens when you infiltrate stormwater, or frankly any water, into the subsurface is that water table rises and it creates this mound as indicated in the diagram. And this happens actually in 2 manners on a project like this. It happens with specific events like the 2-year, 10-year, 100-year storm, which they will model, I believe, as part of the groundwater mounting analysis. But it also happens, as Mr. Chesia testified, it happens year round. As this site is going to infiltrate significantly more, and I'll get to that in a second, more water into the subsurface on an annual basis than currently occurs. So this black line, which is called the static water table, that is going to rise first. It will be up at a higher elevation. Then on top of that, we will have the event-based mounding. So in my view, both of those features, both these new steady state, if I use modeling terms, or the new normal water table needs to be established, which is going to, in my opinion, is going to be significantly higher than the current water level. And then on top of that, we will have the event-based 2-year, 10-year storms to be modeled. And I agree with the applicant's engineer, Mr. Chesia, Sean Reardon, I think they all said it. This is going to be a complicated analysis. There is a model called Hantush, which is a simple analytical model. For a site like this, I think that will be a challenging approach, potential, but you're going to have to get quite innovative with it. I think a much better approach would be to use the U.S. Geological Survey ModFlow model, which would allow the integration of all 15 systems throughout the site. So that would be my specific recommendation on the groundwater mounding analysis, would be to not use a simplified method like Hantush, but a more comprehensive analysis such as ModFlow. And I know I'm speaking in another language here a little bit to some people, but I believe that the applicant engineer, Mr. Reardon certainly, and Mr. Chesia understand what I'm talking about, and perhaps we can come back to that during Q&A period. But good to know that there's going to be some groundwater mounting analysis. I just hope it's comprehensive and covers the points that I mentioned there. And then alterations to wetlands. Okay, now, as I said, because the applicant is proposing to put substantially more water into the subsurface than currently occurs, we can expect to see, frankly, I'll say without a doubt, that the water table is going to rise. Now, the question is how much? And only modeling will tell us that, but I do want to draw your attention to part of the stormwater report, the drainage report, which was submitted, which provides calculations on the amount of stormwater that's going to be infiltrated compared to existing rates. Now, this is a standard that was developed. This is standard number 3 of the Massachusetts Stormwater Policy, which in fact I was involved in developing when I was serving on the Mass DEP Stormwater Advisory Committee. The intent of this standard is to keep it the same. And the reason for that is because if there's a nearby stream, or even worse, if there's a nearby headwater stream, which is even more sensitive, it's really important that those rates be equalized. Or as it says down here, standard 3, and I'm quoting from DEP, of the stormwater requires that the proponents preserve infiltration at pre-development rates in order to maintain base flow. Well, in fact, I've highlighted here the number 13.7. These stormwater volumes, according to the drainage report that's been submitted, are more than 13 times greater than the existing rates. So from that, I think it's fair to say, and I would believe that all of the engineers in the room here would agree with me, that is a pretty significant increase, and that is clearly going to increase water levels. So this is a pretty serious issue. And I would say, and I've reviewed a lot of these projects, 13.7 times existing rates is, I was going to say off the charts, certainly higher than most projects that I've reviewed. So that's pretty significant. And I think that hopefully if the groundwater mounting analysis is done comprehensively, we'll see the impacts on that, which I believe will relate to the adjacent stream. I'll just quickly mention, relate back to the headwater stream. And I think Mr. Chesia said this as well. That stream receives its flow from 2 components: surface runoff across the surface of the ground and groundwater discharge. If either of those changes, the flow changes in the stream, the habitat changes, and that is considered an alteration under the wetlands protection regulations. If we infiltrate 13 times as much groundwater on the site than currently, if the model is done to include the stream flow, we will see a significant increase in the rates of flow in that stream. And that may be, in fact, an alteration to the stream. So that needs to be part of the analysis. My last comment deals with water quality. And I'll just stop sharing my screen here because I don't have any more figures to show you. This stream is tributary to, and I've mentioned this in my past comments, the Pine Tree Brook and the Ponset River, both of which are listed, state listed under the Federal Clean Water Act as impaired, meaning they're already polluted, if you will. The designated impairment is pathogens, bacteria, viruses. And this project, like many other dense urban projects, is vulnerable to transmitting those pathogens to the stream to make matters worse. Now, I should have showed in the letter, I also quoted from the stormwater standards that if a project is within a watershed of an impaired water, which this is, then the stormwater design must take into account those impacts. Now, in this case, the most likely source from this project like this is pet waste. Now, some of you may have heard of this, some of you may have not, but pet waste is a leading cause in Massachusetts, according to the EPA and Mass DEP, of impairment of pathogen-related impairments of streams. So in my opinion, the stormwater system will need to collect and treat any runoff from areas where there may be pet waste. My understanding in most sites, pets don't normally do their business only on impervious surfaces. They often do it in grassed areas. I understand there is a pet area designated on the site. So the runoff from those areas will generate significant, and I've actually provided, not my numbers, but US EPA's numbers of how many pathogens generate from this kind of runoff. So I believe the stormwater system, in this case, according to DEP, because it is an impaired watershed, needs to meet standards and treatment for pathogens from both impervious and pervious areas. And I don't believe the project design does that currently. So I will stop there, Mr. Chairman, and be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Does anyone have questions for Mr. Horsley? Okay.
No, we do have an attendee, but we might want to wait till the end of this.
Okay, why don't we wait on that? Mr. Horsley, thank you.
You're welcome.
Can't lay claim to understanding everything that you said, but I think I got the gist of most of it. And I'm sure that the applicant's engineers understand full well what you were talking about, and hopefully we'll address those issues, and hopefully that modeling analysis will yield some information that will inform all of us with respect to some of the issues that you've raised. But thank you for your testimony. Ned, did you have anyone else that you wanted to present this evening?
I don't have anybody else other than myself. I have a couple of additional comments. One is, as we reviewed the plans, there is nothing shown for dumpster, recycling, or similar storage. We're proposing 116 units and 13 plus or minus buildings. There's nothing shown for where and how they would locate waste receptacles, when and how they would be, waste would be picked up and removed. That's an awful lot of dumpster space needed that needs to be convenient to each of these buildings. And the dumpster space needs to be placed on impervious surface so that there's no drainage taking place from the dumpsters into the subsurface. So I think that's something that the applicant needs to address. The other thing is a little bit based on my past professional experience as General Counsel and Deputy Secretary of Transportation. This porous surface reminds me of a surface that Federal Highway had requested that Mass DOT look at it in the late 90s, called open graded friction course. They called it popcorn mix. It was a porous top coat of asphalt that was put on highways, the purpose of which was for rainwater to drain through and then to drain out to catch basins on the side. It's a beautiful riding surface, and it works very well south of the Mason-Dixon line. MassDOT put that on Route 3 North when Route 3 North project was developed in the early 2000s, and it failed within the first 2 winters. The material had to be taken up and replaced with a more solid riding surface. Several issues. One, it's not designed to handle winter. Freeze-thaw cycles that occur here cause potholes, even in good pavement. This pavement falls apart quickly. 2, it's very susceptible to snowplow and snowplow damage. Any snow event is going to require snow plows. 3, there's a pretty significant volume of traffic that is going to be flowing in and out over this internal roadways. 168 parking spaces presumably will result in at least 360 ins and outs. You can assume that each vehicle is going to leave and come back at least once during the day, if not 2, 3, or 4 times. And in addition to that, Mr. Reardon mentioned trucks, vans, delivery, other things. Circulation is difficult as well. And the last thing is that the porous pavement becomes very susceptible to collecting finer materials like sand and salt that is needed to keep these surfaces safe for pedestrians and for vehicles. You get icing events, you get snow events. You do need to spread chemicals and salt on pavements to make them safe. They clog these pores and they facilitate the breakdown of this material. So I think it's an interesting concept, but it was an interesting concept that MassDOT took on in the early 2000s that failed. And I think it's that experience, in my mind, it's very likely that this porous pavement would fail for a number of reasons. It'll be a maintenance nightmare. And I think the impact on groundwater and the wetlands that are abutted would be significant, particularly if salt is needed to be used in any way, because that salt will then dissolve down into the subsurface and become part of the groundwater that would tend to advance towards the wetland. The last thing I would ask, I know that Mr. Reardon and Mr. Chessie's reports seem to differ a little bit on the height of the fill that is being introduced. As we look at the construction and grading plans, particularly C107, 108, it looks like in the area abutting the stream and the Kelly property, immediately to the lower level of below 648. That's 7 feet of fill that's coming in immediately adjacent to the 25-foot no disturb line. That's the equivalent of almost a full story of building. So in the previous iteration, we had a full story of a garage with a building on top. Now we're introducing nearly a full story of fill, and then introducing buildings on top. The impact of that is not going to be 2 stories sitting on top of the ground, abutting properties, and 3 stories sitting on the ground. It's actually going to be 3 stories and 4 stories. And that impact, I think, is fairly significant, particularly as those buildings sit on the property lines and up against some of my clients' properties. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Corcoran. I think all of the consultants and experts have probably spoken this evening. Are there members of the public that are looking to speak?
There are.
Okay.
Just a minute, let me pull the first.
Are we talking about dozens or hundreds or just a few?
Not yet, but.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, if I could, just while there, does the board giving consideration to a site walk, particularly for 652? I know you looked at 648 months ago, but you haven't been on to 652. I'm wondering whether that is something that the board would like to do.
I mean, I think it's probably a good idea. We'll have to figure out how to schedule it, but yeah, I think it is a good idea. No, I haven't been on 652, and my walk around 648 is a faint memory at this point, so it wouldn't be a bad idea to revisit that. But let me see if we can coordinate that with Beverly to have that site visit.
Mr. Chair, before we move on to public comment, the board did request last week that our engineer come back and make some further comments and explanation of our proposed stormwater management system. And Mr. Cordero is prepared to do that if you're inclined to hear him tonight.
I'm happy to hear that. I'm sorry, I didn't realize I had skipped that. Please.
No.
When we get to the public comment, why don't we hear from Mr. Cordero?
Thank you, Attorney Shute, Jesse, and Chairman Hurley. I think through conversation here this evening, a lot of the issues from the previous application and this one have been aired. What I was hoping to just speak upon for the board's benefit is to really address one of the underlying questions that was raised, particularly at the close of the hearing last week, and echoed a little bit here this evening through some of the other consultants and professionals. Is the previous application made some assertions, some claims, and we're now making different claims and different assertions, with the underlying question being, well, what has changed? Certainly the soils haven't changed. They're geologically the same as they have been for thousands of years. And that is a true and complete statement. What has changed here is obviously the design approach, the design opinion. The previous engineer, rightfully so, made an engineering judgment call in terms of what they believed the site could support in terms of drainage runoff, water infiltration bearing capacity, and release out to the municipal system in Canton Avenue. We saw and were privy to, obviously, the review comments released at that time. And the concern was then, as it is now, stormwater. So in this case, with new glasses on, we approached it differently. Same soil, same very slow, sandy loam soil on site with low infiltration abilities. But we looked at trying to maximize our opportunity to really create that recharge that was missing from the previous application. Previous application simply held the water back and released it slowly out to the municipal system. We're holding the water back to promote as much recharge as we can, and then release the overflow into the municipal system in a very controlled manner. So while they appear different, they are similar in concept. We have just tried to promote more of that water to remain on site. And I know several of the professionals here tonight have raised some questions, some concerns. We're we're going to seek to allay those fears for the benefit of the board in terms of what approaches were taken and how the calculations were done and how the project can technically be proficient and sound. But I want to remove from consideration that the previous application was wrong. I want to remove that this application is wrong. It was just a change in methodology, a change in how we preferred to approach the site and really maximize the stormwater benefit. Now, Mr. Reardon pointed out some very important points. We are using a fairly aggressive tact and a fairly innovative technology to do it. So hearing those comments again, we're committed to having those conversations with Mr. Reardon, particularly in that workshop session that we'll schedule. And we can talk about refinement, and even if there's alternate technologies that can satisfy sort of the years and years of engineering practice that have taken place and meet the demands that we're looking for. So we're happy to do that. We're looking forward to do that. We believe the project certainly has merits and will certainly provide that information to the board for consideration to the consultants. But I just don't want the site to be mischaracterized, especially with regard to stormwater. Certainly we have fill on site. The fill, as the professionals pointed out, is necessary to create separation below our infiltration systems to the water table, the estimated seasonal high water table. So that is a necessary element. Certainly the mounding is a necessary element for us to contemplate as well. But one of your consultants also pointed out very astutely that the way the regulations are also written, if the site goes up an additional 2 feet, then a mounding analysis is no longer required. So I'd suggest caution as we go into the groundwater mounding analyses. They are very complicated. The results sometimes can be confusing. We're going to certainly do our best to provide those in a thoughtful and organized manner. But the alternate strategy is if the site were to go up in elevation, then the mounding analysis is no longer required by regulation. So I'd want that to be taken into account as we look at the groundwater mounding. I'm not suggesting that there's going to be anything that's non-functional or technically not proficient and sound, but the regulations vary in terms of the application as to how you should look at the mounding and really where it's utilized on site. So that's it. I just wanted to make sure those points got across, especially as we speak to the abutters. I mean, no disrespect to any abutters. Our job is to make sure everything is, all the technical data is explained as clearly as we can in a very non-technical manner. So I thought it was a very important point that we just identify that to make sure that the abutters don't think that we've pulled any form of a bait and switch on them between previous iteration of the application and the one here this evening, Mr. Chair.
I appreciate that. Can you just give me a
Mr. Chair.
sense of when a mounding analysis would take place and how long it takes and et cetera?
So the regulations require that mounding analyses, if you are needed if you don't have a sufficient separation depth to the estimated seasonal high groundwater table. So whenever you have an infiltration element, whether it be an above air basin, underground systems like you see here, dry wells, if they encroach within 4 feet to the groundwater table, and
Sorry.
That's okay. And they're used to mitigate runoff conditions through larger storm events. You're required to provide the analysis.
Sorry, I watched you because of some dog barking. I guess what I was saying is, when is this going to take place? Maybe you already answered that.
When is it going to take place for us, for the applicants team?
Yes.
We're looking into it now, Mr. Chairman. We're looking into the aggregation of the data that goes into it and how we can provide that data back to the board in a clean manner.
Okay. But it is going to take place at some point, this ground mounding analysis.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go back then. Bev, if there's some people that want to speak and comments, why don't we let them do so?
Mr. Chair, if I could just add real quick, just two
Yeah, I'm
comments.
sorry, Sean, yes.
Go ahead.
Yep. First, I just want to make sure everybody
Oh, Joe. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
universally, almost universally, recharge is a good thing. So, allowing stormwater to infiltrate into the ground should almost always be viewed as a positive. It's something that's, it's usually engineers' biggest challenge to figure out how to get stormwater into the ground. So I just want to make sure people don't see recharge as a bad thing when it's quite the opposite. So it helps water quality, it helps reduce peak runoff. So it should be viewed as almost always as a positive thing. Now, there are things we need to be considerate of, but I want to make sure people understand that recharge is a good thing. And then the other takeaway is they did do quite a bit more testing, soil testing. And what I found comforting was, all the tests were fairly consistent. So usually one of the things that we worry about the most is if we get tests that are all over the place, that doesn't give us a good confident indication of the kind of soils that we have. In this case, almost all the test pits exhibited the same characteristics. So we have a good sense as to what the characteristics of the soils on the site are.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, may I? Joe Tamposi and Scott Horsley both have their hands up. Joe has for a while.
Okay. Joe, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The other one thing, I don't know if we were wrapping up the discussion, but I did want to also address, there was a question last week as well about the number of affordable units on site. So, I didn't know if you wanted to, continue this discussion first, but I didn't want to leave, that answer as well, kind of, unanswered from the last hearing. We wanted to make sure that we were, addressing the comments that were made at last hearing. So I can make that now or.
Sure, do it now. I mean, that
Sure.
should be fairly simple.
Sure. So, of the project, 116 proposed units, 29 of them are being proposed as rent restricted to the area median income, people who make 80% or less the area median income. And however, because they're rental units, all 116 units will count towards the town's subsidized housing inventory, which is what's used to measure the town's goal of reaching 10% affordable housing. While 29 affordable units may not sound like much to certain people, it is important to keep in mind the overall context in Milton. So in the entire town of Milton, according to the 2020 Housing Production Plan, there are only 12 affordable rental housing units that are available to families. So that's in the entire town. The remaining 96% of the town's affordable housing units are restricted to seniors or individuals with special needs. So, to any one of those, and there are 500 families on the wait list for those 12 units. So to any one of those families that are on the wait list for, one of the town's current 12 affordable units, the 29 units that would be created from this site could be a potentially life-changing opportunity to live in clean, safe, and affordable housing in a high opportunity town like Milton. So we just wanted to make that point and, respectfully, continue to state that we are proud of the ability to create 29 affordable units, as well as 116 units counted towards the town's subsidized housing inventory.
Okay, thank you. Bev?
Yep, Scott?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to add to Sean's comment about recharge, because I think I agree with him that recharge is important and it's good to do it. But I do think there are instances where too much can be a bad thing. And what I mean by that is if you put significantly more recharge in the ground than currently occurs and the water levels rise, if there are basements in homes nearby, those can be impacted. If there is a wetland nearby or a stream, that can be impacted. So those are the things that need to be assessed. I totally agree that recharge is a good thing, but if you look at the guidance, DP guidance, it says match pre-development rates. So that's the goal. And in this case, what I'm reading in the drainage report, and perhaps others are seeing differently, I'm seeing a 13-fold increase. And therefore, I'm guessing that when we do the groundwater mounting analysis, I'm really glad to hear that the applicant has confirmed that they will do it. That was great to hear that a couple times tonight, because I think that's going to be important in our discussion and analysis. But I do think too much can be too much. And I just wanted to add that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. All right, Bev, it sounds like you can have people
Oh,
speak.
okay, thank you. Elizabeth? Her mic is off.
Can you hear me?
There you are, okay.
Hi, it's Elizabeth Janiga from 658 Canton Avenue. Thank you, Mr. Tamposi. We do know that we need affordable housing in this town, and that's not the issue with this site by any means. I would encourage the board members, you should take a site walk. I want to emphasize to the board members, to everybody on the Zoom call, and hopefully the public that's listening, that 652 is a lot on a private driveway. It is not on a main town road. It's on a private driveway. I also would encourage you all to, the board members, if you've not already done so, and if you have, I apologize, but do read Mr. Horsley's report. I am in no way a water expert. I've learned a lot about water, but I have absolutely no background in water. I was able to read it and to comprehend 90% of it, 95% of it. It's very impressive. We have major problems here with water and with the wetlands. And I think from his report, and he is an expert, please read his report because he details his credentials. There's going to be an impact on the wetlands and those of us that are abutting. Again, I'm a direct abutter, again, on a private driveway next to 652 that is on a private driveway. Mr. Bomer and Mr. Reardon, you had mentioned that the developer has done a better job in making small buildings, and I would concur with that. There's still too many, okay? The site is crowded, and I think both of you had mentioned that. It's much too crowded. But then there's this issue of consolidating buildings and making a bigger building. And my question would be, if we're bringing in all this fill, how tall is that building going to be? And then Mr. Bomer said, well, we can just stick that building at the back of the property. The back of the property is 652 down a private driveway that abuts my wetlands. Okay, there are property owners back there in the back of the Tamposi's property. Okay, so I think there's an issue there with just saying we'll just stick it in the back, and quite frankly, it's going to end up being taller than 3 stories. And I would like you to look at that. Please come down and look where this development is being put. Again, I want to emphasize it is not on a town road that the town maintains. 652 is not 648. 652 is down a private driveway, a primitive driveway. It is wooded back here and there are wetlands back here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, yes. Cheryl Zagayas?
Okay. Good evening.
Good evening, Cheryl Tagayas, 660 Canton Avenue. Last week I mentioned my concern about the 7 feet of fill and what I perceived as the inconsistencies between the landscape plan, the construction management plan, and the stormwater drainage and grading plans, and what they would mean for buffers for people like who just spoke and for the Kellys. And one of the things that the current site plan does, and the landscape architect and architect were sure to point out last week, was preserve some specimen trees, some historic large trees on the 648 Canton Ave portion of the property. But the 652 portion of the property has not been analyzed in that same way. And it's a very wooded site. And this plan, I think, will clear cut the site. It will necessitate a clear cutting. I think that should be looked at when you take the site walk and understand the proximity of 7 feet of fill to the property lines and what that would mean for the direct abutters. And then look to see in this new site plan work, pulling those buildings further away from the property lines, excuse me, so that a natural buffer, an existing natural buffer can be preserved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kristen?
Hi, it's actually Leonardo Spona at 654 Canton Ave. Can you guys hear me?
We can, thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you, for all of your time and work. I want to, I'm just a humble cook. And so for me to look at this, I'm a little bit baffled as to how you can call it affordable housing and then have somebody rely on a vehicle. In looking over the 40B, it seems to me in reading it through, and I know, many people could read things and interpret them different ways, but you'd want to help people and put them into a commerce center near transportation, near their banks and supermarkets and things like that. And we're so far removed from that here. So that's the number one thing for me, that I just don't think that this site really falls under that basic requirement of 40B. It seems like a contradiction to me. I echo Elizabeth's, Jenga's concern about our driveway. I'm concerned that it will be used during construction, and I'm concerned for the people on Holmes Lane as well. These roads were not made to have 7 feet of fill brought in. It's just not realistic. And that hasn't been brought up at all, how the neighborhood will be affected or how the developer is going to, make it not so intrusive. The water, in reading through Scott's information, it appears that further downstream, all the water that comes from here is needed, and it needs to be this needs really to be looked at. And one of the points that Scott brought up was that, anything that's here to begin with needs to be here at the end. And there's no way in looking at all of this that is even going to be possible. So I implore the town to really examine what's going on with the water here and, and just take that into consideration. One final thing I have, I know that the space is tight, and you guys are allotting 160 parking spaces, which is just incredible. But my concern is, when the Patriots get back in the Super Bowl or the Red Sox get back in the World Series, and some of these people have parties and they invite their friends over, where are people to park? There's really no design for that. There's no talking about that at all. So, I just don't see how the neighbors are not going to be impacted by construction, by water, by parking. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Again, I'm a humble cook, and 10 people could read 10 things and come away with 10 different things. However, there are things that are black and white here that are, in my opinion, are being ignored. And I implore the town, to work with the developer, maybe on another site, and not this site, because this is just not conducive for what you guys are proposing. I apologize, but that's my sentiment. Thanks again for everybody's time, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
We have Kristen again.
No, that was a mistake. Nope.
Okay. Robin O'Neill.
Is that all right?
Robin?
My name's Robin O'Neill. I live at 30 Holmes Lane. I just had a question about the fill. And my biggest reason is one of the biggest, I heard from the landscape architect last week and the building project, the whole site civil, about adding 7 feet of fill, but saving the big mature trees. 7 feet of fill is going to kill the roots and eventually the trees that you're proposing to save. We dealt with this in town with another large beech tree up at the public library. It did not survive construction, even though it was supposed to be saved. And I question, never mind raising the level of the buildings up another almost a full story, but what are you doing to the existing vegetation? The landscape architect said, this is gonna be a natural setting and we're gonna save all the big mature trees, but if you're adding 7 feet of fill, you're gonna kill the trees. Any comments? My other remark was, I'm sorry, Mr. Tamposi, I understand you want to portray this as a good thing. Could we have more affordable units in here? Is it feasible to add a bit higher percentage of affordable units so that Milton even gets closer to their goal? Or is this really about building a large project that, you know, and you're going to do the bare minimum? I would hope you would offer more affordable housing if that in fact is the reason for doing the project. Thank you.
That is it. That is it for the attendees. We have Joe Tamposi.
Stop picking on me. I don't know. I think someone.
Someone is, yeah, I agree.
Okay, so is that it?
Okay, we should be okay. I'm sorry.
All right. So the important takeaway for me tonight
Oh, no,
is,
no, Joe still wants to talk. There was just somebody in the background. I had to shut off.
okay.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may just, respond to Ms. O'Neill's questions there. To begin with, 40B is a unique program among affordable housing programs because it doesn't rely on any sort of government subsidies, taxpayer subsidies, or other outside funds. The 25% of affordable units are supported by the 75% of market rate units. So while we would certainly love to have a higher percentage of affordable units in this development, we're not asking for outside subsidies. So, in order to make the project economically feasible, given the high cost of housing, 40B is designed so that the 25% affordable units are supported by the 75% market rate units. And that has been a very successful program in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts for over 50 years at creating significant amounts of affordable housing. And then secondly, just to address the question of the fill on site, which has come up several times tonight, and perhaps our engineer Phil Cordero may want to add in something else, but I think it's important to note that while 7 feet of fill has been brought up a lot, it's certainly not 7 feet of fill throughout the entire site. I believe on average, the site is being raised by about 3 feet. Lower towards Canton Avenue, where we're trying to preserve some of those witness trees and specimen trees, there's actually less fill being brought in those areas. So, we'll certainly have, measures taken during construction to protect those trees and make sure that they are, effectively protected and survive through construction. But I did want to clarify that, the site's not being raised 7 feet throughout the entire site. It's about an average of 3 feet. And as that relates to Ms. Tagayas's question about the building height, we're talking about 2- and 3-story buildings here, with adequate setbacks from the neighbors. There's significant existing vegetation. We're proposing, adding in significantly more vegetation and screening to make sure that the height of those 2- and 3-story buildings, is adequately shielded and protected from the neighbors. So that hopefully that addresses some of the questions from Ms. O'Neill and Ms. Tagayas.
Okay, thank you for that.
We have Laura Roche as an attendee who would like to speak.
Okay.
Hi, good evening, Laura Roach, 44 Holmes Lane. I wanted to just quickly go back to Scott Horsley's comment about asking for his recommendation for additional test pits per, I believe, the regulations that he called out in his comment letter. We've been, as abutters, we've been asking for additional test pits from day one here. I believe we got some, but per Scott, as he mentioned tonight, I don't think it's enough. And so is that something that perhaps we can get commitment from maybe tonight from the applicant and from the applicant's team to go ahead and actually do the additional test pits so that we have the sufficient information to make good decisions about what's being put on that site? Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just digress for a second. I mean, I guess my takeaway from this tonight is that we really need to have these meetings of experts, consultants, to see if we can find some common ground and answer some of the questions that have been posed tonight. And I think it needs to fall into two categories. One is sort of the design crowd. And then I think we need to have a meeting among experts, hopefully, that will deal with the vast variety of water issues, including test pits and all the issues that have come up tonight. And I think that would be very helpful. Obviously, the members of the board are not engineers or scientists, and so it will make this process a lot easier if the professionals can sort of reach some level of agreement on some of these important issues, and to the extent there's disagreement that it's insoluble, and that to bring that to the attention of the board. But I think the process is a lot better if we can resolve a lot of those issues among the professionals before you put it to the board to make decisions and to impose conditions and the like. And so hopefully we could deal with some of the mounting issues, and I really think we need to have two separate groups of consultants, one water related, one sort of site design related, and I'd like to hopefully see that happen sooner rather than later. And I'm going to enlist Judy's assistance in making that happen. I thought I heard consensus among the professionals tonight that would be a good thing, and a willingness to participate. And I would very much like to see that happen fairly quickly. So that's my 2 cents. I mean, this has been helpful tonight. I think we've had a fair and open discussion of issues. I think there's some areas where we're moving toward consensus. I think there's some areas where we're not, but perhaps with some work we can do so. So that said,
Michelle Tagayas.
I think I'm done taking comments for tonight. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So I guess I'll leave this to the professionals with Judy's assistance to try and schedule this. But I guess my question for you is how much time do you think you need for this to unfold? And I guess where I'm really headed to is, do we really need to have a public hearing next week, or are we better off to have the next public hearing 2 weeks from tonight to allow those meetings to take place and to have people be able to report back to us? I think the answer is probably to put it off for 2 weeks, but I'll defer it to others in their thoughts on this. Jesse, I'll look to you.
Well, I would ultimately, of course, defer to the board members, Mr. Chair, but I do think 2 weeks lead time, it would be an appropriate amount of time for us to make further progress on some of these.
I just don't see how it could happen in a week in a meaningful way. So I think my charge is to get in touch with Judy in the morning, say, here's what we want to have happen. We want to have these two subgroups. I think Scott Horsley should participate certainly in the water aspect of it. I think his insights have been helpful tonight. And I'll have Judy do that. And my hope would be that you would meet and you would discuss and have some consensus and report back to us 2 weeks from tonight as to where we stand on the resolution or the non-resolution of the issues that have sort of been identified and flushed out a bit tonight. So that would be my preference. Ted and Mike, how do you feel about that?
Mr. Chair, I agree with the plan. I have a question though, and maybe this is for Mr. Cordero, or maybe it's for Mr. Schomer, and it's more of a clarification. The mounding analysis, I think, is going to be really important, obviously. And is that something that's going to be the product of collaboration among the various engineers, or is that something that falls squarely in the applicant's court? I don't know. Does anyone have any comment on that?
Mr. Chairman, I think I could field that comment on behalf of the member. And I think Sean Reardon really laid out the groundwork pretty well. The responsibility to do the groundwater mounding is on the applicant. So that information would be forthcoming from our office for the review by the team. However, as Sean pointed out, it doesn't make sense for us to do that quite yet. If we are going to come to the table and roll up our sleeves and really talk about some finer points regarding drainage, layout, et cetera, it makes sense to do that mounding analyses when the dust settles on that layout. Once whatever changes take place, if changes are to take place on the site layout, We would then do the mounding analyses right afterwards, and that would come from us. So your question was, is it a team effort? Not necessarily, but the precursor to it will most definitely be a team effort. Sean, I don't know. Go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Are you able to predict how long, how much time you'll need after, after you first get started with the mound analysis? How long does that take from front to end?
I can't predict that. There's a lot of modeling parameters that have to go into it, and I think, as Mr. Horsley pointed out, there are different, I guess, technical layers of analyses. You could do the simple method, then there's a complicated method. Obviously, the more complicated you go, the more time it takes to really study it and digest it. So it's tough to predict it here tonight until we really get into that.
Do you expect that when we meet again in 2 weeks, you'll have a better estimate for what you're looking at?
Maybe. I think really the takeaway is through the chair, if Judy is able to bring the meeting of the minds together quickly and we talk through the issues quickly. I think the best I could do is come to the table in 2 weeks and let you know when we'll have the answers, but I probably wouldn't have the answers in 2 weeks on the mounding.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly.
There was some discussion of a further site visit during the course of the proceedings this evening. I would like to schedule such a site meeting. Ted and Mike, I welcome your thoughts on when you think that would be appropriate. It seems to me it ought to be on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning, probably preferably a Saturday morning, as we did the last time, and just particularly since there's been a new addition to the project and 652 has been added. I think it would be helpful, and also to get a sense of location of buildings and the like under the new sort of proposal. I think that would be helpful. Jesse, do you have an idea on when your folks might be able to lead us on a tour?
I think we would defer to the board members on the scheduling of that, and we'll do our best to have representation from all of our offices on the date that you select. So I think Saturday mornings are a good idea. More people can attend those than could probably attend during business hours.
How about a week from this Saturday? Is that something we could shoot for?
That would be October the 2nd.
Yeah.
I can certainly make that work on my end and just get confirmation from our team.
Yeah, if you don't have to give me a definitive answer tonight, but if you could get back to me as to when that would be, I think October the 2nd at 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning would be helpful. And people obviously can join us if they choose to.
Certainly, I'll get back to, if I may suggest, Mr. Chair, to Judy Barrett and yourself and Bev about scheduling that, and I'll get in touch with the rest of our team who's not on the call tonight, just to confirm that we can have representation from everyone's office on that day.
Yeah, the date and the time, because I'll have to send notice out. So that would be great, Jesse.
Just on that point, my thought on that, Mr. Chair, would be that would not be a session of the public hearing, but rather just an informal walk of the site.
Absolutely, it would not be a session of the public hearing.
Site visits are usually pretty, okay, yep. So we're gonna limit that.
Yeah, I would not want it to be a part of the public hearing process.
That's fine. Okay.
It's just an informational walk through the property.
Sure, okay.
Anything else? So we're off then for 2 weeks. We'll come back 2 weeks from tonight to hopefully we will have information as a result of the gatherings of professionals that will help to enlighten us on some of the issues we've talked about tonight. And we will hopefully have seen the site again and the aspects of the site that we hadn't seen before, and have a better sense of some of the issues that we might discuss at the next public hearing. So hopefully that will be a productive session.
Mr. Chair,
thank you all.
Mr.
Yes.
Chair, I apologize. Would that site walk be open to the public?
Of course.
Thank you.
It was the last time. I don't see any
It
reason
was,
why
yeah. I just wanted to confirm. Thank you.
Remember correctly, I think last time there were some attendance limitations that are no longer relevant now.
Right. And we didn't really run into a problem with that in any event. We really didn't have that many people. Okay, I think we've covered everything that I had hoped we'd cover tonight. Thank you all. All the professionals have been extremely helpful tonight. I found the testimony to be, very, very clear and precise and very helpful. There's some difficult issues to try to wrestle to the ground, and I'm hoping with all of your good efforts and offices that we'll get closer to a better project here. That's all of our goal, I think. So with that, I will close the public hearing for the evening and look forward to hearing from you in 2 weeks and seeing some of you hopefully a week from Saturday at the site in the morning.
And you're continuing the
Thanks to
public
all.
hearing to the 14th? I mean, you're continuing the public hearing for 2 weeks?
Yes.
October 5th at 7 o'clock. October 5th, I think it is. Yes.
Let's get that clear, Bev.
Okay.
I think you just need to make that
October 5th
clear.
at 7 o'clock.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, thank you and good night.
Thanks, everybody. Nice seeing all of you.